Hello, come in. Hi, nice to see you. Do make your way amongst this increasing piles of boxes. I'm sort of almost leaving this shelf to the last to put in boxes because it's got so many favourites on it. So I'm just browsing those again. It's also got chocolate on it. It's a nice little... Oh, talking about chocolate, it's very funny. I spoke at a literary festival back in the day when you could still do that, and in the goodie bag they gave this bar of dark chocolate with this wonderful quotation from Shakespeare's The Tempest. This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. It's a very nice way of talking about chocolate. Anyway, I wanted to get this off the shelf for you. One of the most famous and beautiful poems in the English language is Gray's Elegy in a country churchyard, Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard. And of course, therefore, it was the subject of lots of interesting reprintings and special editions, of which this was one. Do come over and have a seat. Got a light here. So, Gray was an 18th century poet, a very fine poet, with all that elegance and beauty of diction. But it's getting towards the middle and end of the 18th century, so it's just a little bit more romantic energy than there might have been in Pope or Dryden. He wrote the famous Elegy, which is set in the churchyard of Stoke Poges, near where he was living. Well, there's a debate as to whether he started in the 1740s, but anyway, he probably finished the version we have in 1750, and it was published in 1751 only because he'd sent it to his friend Horace Walpole, one of the Walpoles, and it was spreading around London like wildfire. People were reading it, and then a magazine was going to print it, without any acknowledgement to him. So he published it, and of course it's famous for the sheer beauty, particularly the beauty of its opening. Everybody knows it. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly o'er the lea. The ploughman homeward plods his weary way, and leaves the world to darkness and to me. It's just the most exquisite piece of scene setting, and the sound of it, you almost feel the dusk and the sound of the bell tolling in the country church. And let's just see if we can find that opening in this rather odd edition. The sound of it, the curfew tolls the knell, the toll, knell, A of parting day, and then the O sound on the toll is picked up with the lowing herd winds slowly o'er the lea, and then all these rounding ow, oh sounds. The ploughman homeward plods his weary way, and then the E sounds ease out and leaves the world to darkness and to me. I sort of sort of sound, and then it's perfect imagery. So it goes on. You may remember about the glimmering. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. And the kind of drowsy lull is where he's taking you, but of course, in a sense, he's lulling you into a false sense of security, because he's then going to look around the churchyard, and he's going to, in the end, think about opportunity, and to use a very modern phrase, about equality of opportunity. Where he thinks about how there are people buried in this churchyard who aren't known, who aren't famous, who didn't get a chance to shine, but maybe that was because they were never given the chance, they were never given the education, and he thinks of how it was penury it was penury that prevented them. I'll just see if I can find the relevant verses. Chill penury repressed their noble rage, is the line. So let me just show you this edition. So an elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray, and you can see here that this is 1855. In fact, somebody's written that. They've actually got it on 1855, and somebody in 1855 has written this. So it's almost a century, in fact slightly over a century, just over a century after the original poem was published, and here it is. Now what distinguishes this is this particular edition is the illustrations, many of which are by a guy called Burkitt Foster, who, and it tells you who the engravers were, who was one of the finest sort of bucolic countryside rural landscape painters of the Victorian age. And you can see here is in fact, there's the curfew tolling the night, Stoke Poges Church, the curfew tolling the knell of parting day, and the lowing herd winding slowly o'er the lea. There are great gaps in this, so it's obviously been printed in such a way so that you could make notes, or, you know, now fades the glimmering landscape on the site, and there is the glimmering landscape fading, and you can see the flock of sheep. A series of really beautiful, evocative rural scenes. And as I say, you could have read this poem for sort of, you know, sheer nostalgia, but it then becomes a meditation on mortality. You know, the boasts of heraldry, of the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth they gave, await alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. And he thinks about the sheer unknown gifts or courage. He talks about a village Hampden, you know, Hampden being the great aristocrat and lawyer who resisted the arbitrary tyranny of the throne. Some village Hampden that with dauntless breast the little tyrant of his fields withstood. Some mute inglorious Milton here may rest. Some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood. Their lot forbade, nor circumscribed alone their growing virtues. Far from the madding crowds in ignoble strife, their sabre wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool sequestered vale of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. Astonishing poetry. So I've often read it and I've often reflected on it. And when we moved here to Linton, I used to muse upon it a bit in our own churchyard, because Linton churchyard is very beautiful and very interesting. It has, you know, this poem talks a lot about trying to discern the names on the gravestones, and Gray thinks about how great these people might actually have been, and how we might have heard of them if only, you know, they'd had education and there'd been a chance for them to shine. There's just as much unique value and worth in each person. And it's a real meditation on that. So I would sometimes sit and meditate on that myself. And in fact, hang on, let me get this for you, perhaps, where you can go from an old book to a new book. Here, I have my own books on the shelf here. In fact, come to think of it, I did. This is the collection of my pieces, or one of the two collections of my pieces for the Church Times. I did, in fact, write a reflection on Gray's Elegy. I bought this, by the way, this edition, just to let you know, because it's such a famous poem. There are loads of Victorian editions of it, and this is very nice. You can imagine a Victorian family taking this out on a Sunday and enjoying all the engravings. Well, I bought this for £10. You know, it's a book that's you know, over 150 years old, 160 years old. It's given pleasure to countless generations. It can give pleasure to me. And, it, you know, £10, you can't buy a paperback for that. Maybe if we've got time, I'll just read you this little piece. It's called In a Country Churchyard, obviously borrowing from Gray. And I read it now with some sense of Gray's sense of the elegiac and the passing, because of course we're now in our last couple of weeks living in this village, and I'll doubtless find other beautiful spots, but certainly Linton churchyard is one of the most beautiful. So here's what I wrote about it. The other evening I found myself straying through the lovely churchyard of St Mary's, Linton, with its path between rows of ancient yews, its further reaches bordered by light woods on one side and the clear-flowing stream of the Granter on the other, and its many gravestones and memorials, most of them mottled, lichen-covered, their inscriptions and outlines not so much fading as greening, deepening, somehow merging with the soil in which they stand, the place in which they are planted. I paused there, just to savour the twilight, the shimmer of shadow and light, the patter of leaves, and found both the place and the time had summoned unbidden the resonant lines of Thomas Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds. Certainly there was a rich hush, and I could see in Linton, just as Gray had seen in Stoke Poges, beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell for ever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. But of course, Gray, in that poem, goes on to challenge his own phrase about the rude forefathers of the hamlet, and to wonder what might have been achieved by so many who were denied education and opportunity in his unequal society. He thinks of some village Hampden, some mute and glorious Milton, who never ruled or wrote because chill penury repressed their noble rage and froze the genial current of the soul. As I stood there, I reflected that even though more than 270 years have passed since Gray stood in the twilight of a country churchyard, and even though the education and literacy for which he was pleading are so much more widespread, it's still true that chill penury holds back and denies opportunity to so many, perhaps more so now than when I first read and loved this poem 40 years ago. As Gray's memorable and sonorous lines continued to unroll in my mind, my reflections took another turn. His poem is not only a eulogy for the excluded poor, but also, as one might expect, a moving memento mori, an unflinching and chastened attention to mortality of the kind that's almost forbidden now. The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. Yet as these lines sounded through my mind, and I gazed around in the last of the light at the many graves all mossed and green in this lovely place, I had a sense, not of morbidity or of melancholy, but of richness, of fullness. The contemplation of finitude only deepened my sense of plenitude, of the sheer and undeserved abundance of my being here, a sense that all of it must be savoured. This churchyard, in the viridian darkness of its yews, the little stream I would cross as I left, and beyond it, an opening door and the welcoming light of home. So that's how I finished my little meditation, both with the literal opening door and welcoming light of this house and home as I came back and across the twilight from the churchyard, but perhaps also with the sense that beyond the twilight of this world there is an opening door, a light, and a welcome home. Anyway, thanks for dropping by.